Oppenheimer. What's the name of your farm?
Petali.
And where's Petali located?
Just north of Walker, northeastern New South Wales, New England region.
Yep. And what are the soil types on Petali?
Mainly what we call trap, which is technically it's a sandy loam, and it ranges in some areas from a granite to a basalt, but most of it is trap, what we call trap, which is basically in between a granite and a basalt.
Right. And what's the annual rainfall for Petali?
Close to 800 millimetres, and it's mainly summer rainfall.
Right. And so what was your farm stocking policy prior to working with Agdesign?
We've had mainly rotational grazing. We've had different forms of rotational grazing, and we've had quite an emphasis on pasture sowing, a lot of fertiliser. We've almost been high input. We've been sort of on the verge of being high input, but quite a costly pasture regime. And with the rotational grazing that we had, it really was a bit lacking in that we were having to go back and resow our pasture. So we're looking for something that was going to give us some sustainability with the pasture base, and that's why we've changed.
And so what type of farming system have you implemented?
Well, gradually since 2004 we've put in initially 200 hectares of Technograze, and now we're up to over 400 hectares.
Yep.
And we have plans to increase that further, but basically what we've implemented is a form of technograzing where it's a bit of an Australian blend, where we've got not the typical techno format from New Zealand, but we have the ability to have small mobs but high stock densities, and that's the main issue for us.
Right. Right. So there's a bit more permanent fencing than you'd normally find in a techno-grazing system, say in New Zealand. That's right.
That's right. We have less temporary fencing and more permanence.
Right. So what have been the changes in stocking rates since implementing the techno-graze system?
Well, in most of our country, we've been able to maintain a similar stocking rate, but with less pasture sowing and a slightly lower rate of fertiliser. We've been able to, in some areas, increase the stocking rate from about a 15 to 16 dry sheaf equivalent average up to 22 DSCs plus. And that's fine, that's all and well, but really what we're looking in the future is just having a sustainable system where we're able to maintain that 15 to 16 dry sheaf equivalents without having to have the costly resowing every 5 or 6 years, or maybe 5 to 10 years, and having moderate fertiliser applications.
Right.
But particularly one of the particular issues for us is sustainability, as far as not having to resow pastures, maintaining the pasture base, but also dealing with worms, particularly in our sheep, which is an ongoing issue when we've got a high summer rainfall. It's a very difficult area for worms and sheep.
Right. So with your pastures, a lot of them, when we first started, there were some pastures that maybe would have been earmarked for replacement at the time we put systems in. What's been happening with those?
Well, it's been very interesting to see how pastures that were in need of renovation have either held or improved with the amount of perennial species that were there. Given time, I mean, this form of grazing is actually a way of improving the pastures. You can always shortcut that by resowing as well, but it's a very large cost to be going back and resowing all the time. So what we've seen is some perennial species such as Phalaris that have come back, and we gave up sowing those grasses probably 10 or 15 years ago because we thought they weren't surviving under our regime. But in fact, a lot of those perennials, cox and fescue, are thriving under the new grazing system.
Right. So you mentioned some of the animal health benefits earlier, but what's happening with your animals in the system, so that summer period where you might get barber's pole and that sort of thing, compared to the animals that are on the areas that you haven't put into the system?
Well, Homunculus or barber's pole is a killer for sheep, and the basic issue with barber's pole is you need a rotational grazing system. We also have a good system of monitoring, and we use effective chemicals. We also have genetic selection. We use that suite of tools to deal with this issue, but the main tool that we have against barber's pole is rotational grazing. So even with a 60-day rotation, and sometimes we go out to a 90-day rotation, we're able to control barber's pole very effectively. At the higher stocking rates that we have sometimes, which could be, say, the 15 to 18 ewes per hectare, maybe sometimes we have to watch out for a little bit of black scour. And black scour worm, of course, has a longer life cycle, but it's not a killer, it's not really a problem. But the barber's pole, that is a major problem for high rainfall areas such as New England, it's not for us. It basically falls out of the system. So there's a major problem that we've overcome. Not having to worry about barber's pole, and then it gives us other animal welfare benefits, and things like stable strength are improved, which is a big profit driver for us.
Yeah, that's excellent. So Martin, what would you say to anyone thinking of using Agdesign to implement a new grazing system?
Well, as far as I'm concerned, rotational grazing for livestock is a way to increase the utilisation of your pasture, to beat some animal health problems, and also increase productivity. There are many different ways to do it. The system that we're using, it gives us the ability to have high stock densities but maintain smaller mob size, and that's a big issue as far as animal performance, particularly individual animal performance. So traditionally in most rotational grazing systems you end up with bigger mobs to achieve that high stock density. So we're able to have high stock density but have smaller mob size, and the mobs for us are normally between, in sheep, 400 and 600 sheep per mob, and in cattle usually between 40 and 60, maybe up to 100 cattle, but they're generally small mobs, so you have a very, very small tail, if ever. You have a tail, so good animal performance. So there aren't many systems that can achieve both those aims, so you get good pasture utilisation. In our system currently, where we're on a 90-day rotation, it means we're grazing our country for 10 days in a year, out of 365 days, so the country is being rested for 355 days, which is quite extraordinary. So you think of the other issues such as promoting ground cover, reducing runoff, those sorts of issues are really going to be promoted. So, and it's going to promote our perennials, which are the base of our pasture. So it's a good system. I'd recommend it to anyone.
Very good. Martin Oppenheimer,